hit record and turn it over to Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be with you. Happy 2020, 2 weeks into the new year. And I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to kick off this amazing webinar series for NACE, North American Invasive Species Management Association. So thank you, Belle. Can you hear me okay? Can everybody out there hear all right?
Sound great to me, Elizabeth.
Okay, perfect. I just want to check before I get going. All right, well, again, thanks for being here. We are going to talk about what has become one of my favorite topics, watercraft inspection and decontamination. You'll see the acronym WID throughout the presentation. It's just a long thing to type out and say, and we say it a lot. So that's what that acronym WID means, and that's hopefully you're in the right place today, and that's what you're here to learn about. So just the presentation outline, what I'm going to go through with you today. Watercraft inspection and decontamination, or WID, is still, I would say, a fairly new thing in that it's only really kind of been going on the last 10 to 15 years in the Western US, and now places in the Midwest and the East are also doing boat inspections. And so going to just quickly take you through a little bit of the history of kind of how this all came to be, and go over some of the coordinating activities that have happened that are fairly significant and provide a whole lot of resources to the rest of the nation for those that choose to engage in this pathway management application, basically. We'll talk through really kind of the different types and models of watercraft inspection and decontamination. There's a couple of different ways to slice the apple, so I'll kind of share with you the different ways people are putting boots on the ground to do this. And then I'll kind of close off with talking about Colorado's state program and how we are putting this on the ground in Colorado, and kind of what that means to us and our constituents here in terms of maintaining our outdoor recreation and maintaining our water supply systems. So that's what I have queued up for you today, and thanks again for joining me. So I'm just going to jump right on in. Okay, so throughout this presentation, we're going to talk a lot about zebra and quagga mussels, and I'm not going to go through really any of the very specific biology or ecology or management of these specific species. I'm really focusing the whole lecture today on watercraft inspection and decontamination. But we will talk a lot about zebra and quagga mussels because they are the poster child for this management application. And however, you know, a lot of different taxa have sort of that poster child, right? Like tamarisk for riparian health and things of that nature. But we're really concerned about all aquatic invasive species, or all invasive species, really, anything that could move on a conveyance or on a watercraft. And it applies to terrestrials too. Terrestrial plants, for example, you know, making sure hunters are cleaning tires to not move weed seeds. That's really kind of what we're talking about here with boats, but it extends beyond just zebra and quagga mussels. So I just want to kind of start off with illuminating that we are concerned about a lot of different species, plant and animal, that can move on watercraft. And while zebra and quagga mussels are the target and the poster child because of their economic impacts and their ecological and recreational impacts that we've seen in other places in the country, we are stopping a whole suite of invasive species through watercraft inspection decontamination. So I'm going to start off with kind of coordination. We'll kind of start at the big picture and then drill down kind of to the boat ramp, if you will. I have had the great honor and privilege of chairing the Western Regional Panel on Aquatic Nuisance Species for a number of years now, and that's where a lot of the real meaningful cross-jurisdictional work is happening across states and among federal agencies. Hopefully, the folks on this webinar are familiar with the panels. There are 6 panels nationwide, and they're all subcommittees of the Federal Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, created in the National Invasive Species Act. And this is really how we coordinate aquatic nuisance species nationwide, is through the task force and the panels. And of course, the committees within. As far as the Western Regional Panel on Aquatic Nuisance Species, we have 19 states, 4 Canadian provinces, a suite of federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, and private industry. And preventing the spread of specifically zebra and quagga mussels is a top priority for our members. I'll talk in a minute about the QZAP, or the Quagga Zebra Action Plan, which was requested by a member of Congress and produced by the panel with the A.N.S. task force. And that's kind of been our roadmap for the last decade on how we've approached this particular issue. And then I'll also just quickly share with you about a group, Building Consensus in the West. It was a work group of the Western Regional Panel, partnership based, with a whole lot of different organizations and partners involved, grant funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service and others. And this group really spent a good chunk of time, 8 years or so, kind of diving into a lot of the watercraft inspection and decontamination nitty gritty, and creating a lot of protocols and scientific standards and a legal framework that is available to anyone that chooses to engage. So that has been kind of the main place where we're coordinating on a pretty big scale. And then, of course, a lot of us at the state level, we have state task force. The Colorado State Task Force is meeting actually in just January 28th. So just in a little bit of time, we'll be gathering for our annual meeting. And there's, of course, local groups as well. But this is kind of on the big scale how we're dealing with coordination in terms of watercraft inspection and decon. Because our reality is that in managing this vector, and similar with a lot of other things like firewood, for example, the recreational users are moving across the landscape. And so we really need to be well coordinated if we're going to be effective. So another group that I would like to mention is WISCE, the Western Invasive Species Coordinating Effort. This is the 19-state Western Aquatic Nuisance Species Coordinators and the province coordinators. And, you know, not everybody had A.N.S. programs. Now all the Western states do have A.N.S. programs and coordinators, which is fantastic. And most have watercraft inspection and decontamination programs. So this group was formed really kind of ad hoc, just out of a need for state coordinators to talk and to coordinate and share information and work through problems and help each other. And this group has really played a meaningful role, I know, in my career as well as in my program implementation. They're just the best of the best. And so we meet on the phone every month, and we try to meet in person once or twice a year, usually in conjunction with the panel. We have this group actually I'm hosting the annual meeting in February this year of this group, but I encourage the state coordinators on the phone to engage with your fellow state coordinators because the state programs just get so much stronger. Okay, so you know, zebra mussels are not a new issue. There are some folks that are saying, hey, we've been dealing with this a long time. Why all of a sudden is this a big deal again? It took about 20 years for the mussels to make their way out west. And so there's a huge body of knowledge in the Great Lakes and in the East that we are constantly looking to and learning from. And we greatly appreciate our partners in those spaces and all of the things that we've been able to share. Quagga mussels were found in Lake Mead in 2007. And so for the West, it is still even more, this has held the attention for still more than a decade in terms of a high priority species. Watercraft inspection decontamination really kind of came to be after Lake Mead. Now we had mussels in Oklahoma and Kansas, and so we had zebra mussels in the Western Regional Panel since about 1999, 2003. But crossing over the 100th meridian all the way to Lake Mead, knowing that it is recreational vehicles moving it, it's the only way they're moving. It's not, you know, it's not the Mississippi River. We don't have that commercial shipping. It's not downstream movement. And so we know this is one vector, right? It's not the only one, but it's a very significant one. Now, prior to the mussels being found in Lake Mead, there was some watercraft inspection going on. Montana had roving patrols. The California ag stations were inspecting boats for invasive species. And there was a program, a training program happening at Lake Mead through the 100th Meridian Initiative, through Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, and through some amazing people at Lake Mead, Bill Zook, Wen Baldwin, and others. And so there was a foundation. After the mussels were found in Lake Mead, the state of Utah started up their program almost immediately after, and then Colorado followed quickly after in 2008. At the same time, the QZAP was requested by Senator Feinstein from California, and it took the Western Regional Panel almost 2 years to get it done, but it was completed, and it is a task force document. And then, of course, we tried to implement it, and it was very difficult because there wasn't, we really were scratching kind of a new surface. We were creating something new that really didn't exist in the proportions that we were trying to do it with. And we're talking about, when you're talking about places like Lake Mead Recreation Area, National Recreation Area, this is one of our highest used national recreation areas in the nation. People from all over the country are visiting there and then going home. We don't have anything like that in Colorado. Our closest would be Curaconte National Recreation Area. Blue Mesa Reservoir is our largest reservoir. It has 5 boat ramps. So compare that to Lake Mead, and the scale is pretty phenomenal. So the Western states formed WSCI very shortly after. We were really struggling with state and federal legal authority, and through the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Sea Grant Law Center, along with Oregon Sea Grant and OFWA and others, a legal workshop was held in Phoenix in 2012 that really examined the legal authority of what we were trying to do in terms of trying to stop mussels from leaving the National Recreation Area and infesting places in the West that don't currently have mussels, and how to do that. We really didn't know how to do that, and it kept coming down to legal authority. And that legal workshop, there was an action plan created, and it kind of gave birth to building consensus in the West, which later became a WRP, Western Regional Panel work group. The same time, we found quagga mussels in Lake Powell, and Lake Powell is a national recreation area very similar to Lake Mead with millions of visitors, another giant game changer for us in the West. But the states were working together, and we were working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, National Sea Grant Law Center, all these different organizations, and we were able to do some pretty amazing things. I'm not going to kind of go through the timeline. I had one of my colleagues tell me recently I'm kind of a history timeline geek, and I am, because I think it's important that people kind of understand where we come from. But for the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of move ahead. I'm going to talk to you about a regional data sharing system, which is available to anyone that wants to share information on watercraft inspection decontamination a little later. A big 2014, the Water Resources Development Act authorized watercraft inspection decontamination through the Army Corps of Engineers in the Columbia Basin. That was very significant, and that was just reauthorized for the Upper Missouri, the Upper Colorado, the Arkansas, and the South Platte last year. So there are opportunities. The NMMA, that's the National Marine Manufacturers Association. ABYC is the American Boating and Yachting Council. We had a Marine Summit in January of 2015 that sprung a 3-year effort that was completed in 2018 to create a report for boat manufacturers telling them how to make boats less likely to move AIS and how to make boats easier and safer to decontaminate. So that was a very significant thing that is hopefully shaping a nationwide change on this issue as we move forward. The Department of Interior launched a multi-year effort called Safeguarding the West that really brought a higher priority among the federal family and created a lot more coordination between states and the federal government out west. That's had a lot of positive change. The Western Governors Association, or WGA, just completed their Biosecurity and Invasive Species Initiative. They hosted just last year a summit, a leadership summit on invasive mussels. So there's been a lot of effort over the last decade to try to continue that political and public support for boat inspections. And we're currently rewriting the Western Regional Panel, the Quagga Zebra Action Plan, in order to provide an updated set of recommendations to decision makers, given all that has been accomplished and all that has been learned. So that said, I want to just kind of talk for a minute about building consensus in the West. I can't say enough wonderful things about this effort and thank all of the partners that worked on this. Utilizing Fish and Wildlife Service grant funds, there were 4 in-person intensive facilitated workshops among state coordinators with Park Service and other partners in the room. We had 8 subcommittees and there were 52 whiskey meetings dedicated to these issues. So when I talk about the final reports and the products that are available to you, I want you to know what went into them, that they didn't just come from somebody sitting in their office, you know, typing up a document. There was a lot of expertise and thought and time amongst, like I said, the best of the best, really digging in and going through the standards and looking at the literature and talking about the management to come up with, you know, this framework for operations. And so I just want you to know how much went into them, because I think the credibility of who worked on these, the vast amount of people that worked on them and all that went into them is really phenomenal. I don't know anywhere else in my, you know, time in invasives where something like this has really come together like this. So it's pretty special. The National Sea Grant Law Center is absolutely phenomenal. I can't say enough wonderful things about them and the work that they have done through, again, grant funding from Fish and Wildlife Service, Joanne Grady, Sam Chanup in Oregon Sea Grant, Stephanie Schulwalder-Otts with Sea Grant Law Center. This group is absolutely phenomenal. And what they have produced is a model legal framework for watercraft inspection and decontamination. And they partnered with AFWA in order so that these are nationally approved. I don't know if approved is the right word, but these are national in scale and scope. So the first document in the upper left is a model legislative provision. So if you're going to do boat inspections and decontaminations in any sort of mandatory required fashion, you need legal authority. And so that needs to come from your state legislature. And so this is a model law that has everything you need, and you can pick and choose the provisions that work for you. You don't have to like adopt it in whole. The next piece is a model regulation, and there were committees that worked on this with the legal experts, assistant attorney generals. I did not mention the National Association of Attorney Generals. They were a very key partner in this. So forgive me if I'm forgetting some partners, I apologize. But the model regulations, again, kind of everything you need scoped out for you that you can pick and choose the pieces you want to implement. And then a model memorandum of understanding between programs that are going to have some sort of reciprocal agreements. And then the final piece is actually a gap analysis. Which looks at how current provisions relate to the model. And the map you see on the screen is the analysis. So the green states, which are mostly off in the west, are the ones that have WID programs, watercraft inspection decontamination programs. And then you can see kind of the other colors. Yellow is courtesy boat inspections, blue is launch restrictions, purple is transport restrictions, and red is no relevant provisions. So again, this is available. Similarly, the National Invasive Species Council and the A.N.S. Task Force in 2015, as one of the action items, created a federal policy options paper that talks about the federal legal authority. And so that companion is available, and any of this could be tailored to federal or local governments as well. Okay, so once you have the legal authority, then you actually have to implement it. So how do you do that? Again, a suite of tools have been made available. So that long process for building consensus that the states went through with the federal family or federal partners, everything the states agreed to, the Western Regional Panel published a report just last year in April that goes through definitions is huge. We were not speaking the same language in terms of how we classify waters, how we do inspections and decontaminations, what is a high-risk boat, what is a low-risk boat, all of that stuff we have defined and it's available to you. And then what do you do when you find those sorts of things? How do you treat them? We also published a Quagga Zebra Action Plan for Western Waters status update. So all the original action plans, we categorized what had been accomplished. It's not a national scope document, it really is Western in focus, but it gives a good progress on where we're at. The Uniform Minimum Protocols and Standards, which is known as UMPS, people talk about UMPS a lot. This document was recently updated. This is a document that was done by the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission with the Invasive Species Action Network, and the Western Regional Panel's Watercraft Inspection and Decontamination Committee worked on this as well. They also did a supplement, a review of chemical use associated with WID. So these documents, UMPS is really important. This is really the standards that we go by, and there's a qualifier. This is the documentation or the collective documentation of the scientific standards that we base our inspection and decontamination protocols by. So why do we use 140-degree water on the hull and 120-degree water on interior compartments? Because that's what the science tells us. That's how mussels die at different life stages. And that's where the boating community tells us it's safe for the craft. So we've worked with the boating community and we've collected all of this information from the scientific world, and that's what is documented in here. So this is a really significant foundational piece of the puzzle. But then how you apply that on a boat ramp is a little bit different. So in Colorado, you're going to hear about my program in a minute. We have 72 mandatory stations in Colorado. We have almost 800 inspectors statewide. I have to train and certify all of those people every single year. So it all has to be spec'd out. It has to be clear as day. So we have a Western training curriculum for inspectors in decontamination and a train the trainer program. Right now, today, as I speak, Quagga D. Davis is at Lake Mead teaching the very first class of the year. And so, and I'll tell you how you can sign up for those in my last slide, so stick around till the end. But this is the step-by-step protocols for how you inspect a boat and how you decontaminate a boat. It's really very straightforward, and how you train people. So everybody's trained the same. And that's really important. And then similarly, the Western Regional Panel has gone through and created sampling and monitoring protocols and laboratory standards for early detection of zebra and quagga mussels. And so why do we talk about monitoring when we're talking about boat inspections? Because you have to know, one, what species you're trying to prevent or contain by doing boat inspections, and you have to actually have some assurance that you don't have them. So you got to monitor your waters if you're going to try to prevent the introduction. Okay, so monitoring and boat inspections really go hand in hand. So all of this is available, it's online, and it is available for anybody that wants to utilize it. Finally, I want to talk about the data sharing system before I get into the Colorado program here. This is a pretty awesome thing. It's one of my absolutely favorite things. It was originally created by a boat inspector on a boat ramp back in 2009 at Boyd Lake State Park, who just thought all this paperwork was absolutely ridiculous. It's gone through a whole lot of revisions, and in 2012, it was relaunched for Android and iOS. In 2014, it was personalized through a Quagga Zebra Action Plan grant and made available for other jurisdictional use. So it's a Colorado application that has been personalized to great extent so that anybody doing watercraft inspection and decontamination can use it. The application itself is not, there's no cost to using it. You do have to have your own hardware and your own connection. But we are very fortunate to get funding from the Quagga Zebra Action Plan grant through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's Lower Colorado region to maintain this application. So it's a really powerful tool. It's what we do all of our data entry in, mobile data entry. It is a powerful retrieval system. So when I get, asks for information from important decision makers and I need good data fast, I can answer their questions pretty easily. And then we also have a help desk so that when somebody has a problem on a boat ramp, there's somebody in IT to help them. They don't call me because I wouldn't know what to do. I call the help desk too. And so what does it do? One of the most important things is when a boat leaves an infested water in the western U.S. and is not, either is compliant or not compliant, it will send a notification to the destination saying that this boat is on the way, which helps us to not only serve that customer better, but to also make sure that that boat doesn't get into our waters before it gets inspected and deconned. It really helps with risk assessment because we kind of have an inspection history. It's not tracking a boat. We don't know when a boater goes somewhere that doesn't have an inspection station. It's basically just holding the data from the inspection and that inspection history. And it has data collection purposes for all WID uses. It's not publicly available. You have to be a certified inspector or decontaminator to have access authorized by the state. It can be used for law enforcement, reporting, and data analysis. So right now, the green states on the maps are the entities doing boat inspections that are using the WID application. And you'll see some spots in California. We have a lot of local governments there, and of course Lake Tahoe is one of our earliest users and a great contributor to the system. The blue places are the places that we know of that are doing boat inspections, and so therefore they are a potential user. If you don't have boat inspections and decontaminations, then the system would not serve you, and so those are basically, maybe potential users in the future. But I do know of one error on this map. I believe Wisconsin is now doing inspections, so I apologize and I will fix that. And if there are others doing inspections and you're interested in this, we would love to share this with you. Okay, National Boat Industry Partnership. I just want to talk about this for a minute because I think it's kind of significant on the national scale. This report that was published is October 2018. It basically tells the industry, the manufacturers, how boats are moving AIS, what we're doing to the boats to inspect and decontaminate them, and what the AIS community or A.N.S. community would like in terms of making it safer and easier to decontaminate and making it harder for recreational craft to move invasive species. And then the National Marine Manufacturers Association made this created a policy paper and made this a priority this year and have done a lot of outreach. And so there is a video on the Colorado A.N.S. program that they put out last summer, and there's a video on the Lake Tahoe program as well. And there is a ballast tank solutions team that is being worked on trying to find ways to prevent the spread of invasive species in ballast tanks. So right now we're trying as a Western kind of community to put all of these great efforts and history together into a new action plan. And I just kind of want to lay this out before I zoom in on Colorado. You know, I know that in a lot of the nation, zebra mussels is not the top issue anymore. But there's still a lot of the country that does not have zebra and quagga mussels. And like I said when I started, boat inspections and decontamination stop a whole suite of invasive species. And so a lot of times we talk about the uninvested West, and there's a lot of other places in the nation that is uninvested. I would say every state in the nation has something that they would want to protect. And so really, you know, we've been doing this now 12, 13 years, and the places that are negative are the places that have boat inspection stations. We do have some containment stations on the lower Colorado River, but generally the vast majority are for prevention and to keep mussels out. And so as much as anybody is interested in expanding the network, and I would love to get our eastern boat inspection stations on here in Minnesota and Wisconsin and New York and anywhere else, because I think, you know, that partnership, this is not a just a Western issue. This is a national issue. It's just more prevalent right now in the West because we have learned that recreational boats are the vector. Colorado, for example, is a headwater state, so they're not going to come downstream and infest us. We are the mother of rivers. We have 7 river basins that originate here. And so from a water industry, drinking water, agriculture water, hydropower, and natural resources and outdoor recreation, we need to protect those water supplies. And so this is the way that we're doing it. So let's talk about what watercraft inspection and decontamination is, okay? What is it that we're actually doing out there? So again, it kind of starts with sampling, in that we're either gonna be doing prevention or we're gonna be doing containment. Prevention meaning we're gonna try to stop the invasive species from getting into the water body. Containment meaning we are going to try to contain or keep that invasive species in the water body and not allow it to leave on a boat. So we have this regional language in terms of how we classify water bodies after we have detected a mussel. And we are doing early detection monitoring. So we are doing plankton toes to try to find the microscopic initial life stage. We're not waiting until we have an invasion on our shoreline. So we're doing monitoring a little bit different as well. So basically, if it's negative or inconclusive, generally, we're doing prevention. If it's suspect, positive, or infested, we're doing containment. Now, there are different types of watercraft inspection and decontamination stations out there. Negative prevention water, which would mean that they've never had any verified detection of an A.N.S. or they have been delisted. And other A.N.S. positive water is a classification we use here in Colorado that some others use. Our list is in our Chapter 8 regulations, but it means that they're positive for something else. Maybe it's milfoil, maybe it's mud snails, but something else that we don't want to get we don't want to be moved. And then, of course, the zebra quagga mussel containment is where we have a verified detection of zebra quagga mussels. And then an off-water WID, we have a lot of these. These can be at offices, they can be at marine dealers, they can be at service centers, they can be at businesses, and the majority are on highways. So we do have a lot of highway stations. Now, I'm going to kind of walk you through how you build up a program if you don't have one. It starts with education, outreach, information, and inReach. So a lot of folks are doing that already. When we found mussels, we looked to what was happening out east. And what was working really well was education, right? Stop aquatic hitchhikers, clean, drain, dry, now clean, play, go. Like that's working, okay? So we need to raise that awareness and we need to build public and political support. And so, and that's true of any program, right? So however you can educate folks in your space, and this is kind of my space here. I spent last weekend at the International Sportsman's Expo. My staff is setting up for the Denver Boat Show today. We're going to be there all weekend. Like I said, we have our task force next week. We had our reservoir supervisors meeting last week. I go around to our water basin roundtables. I give presentations. I give presentations to anybody who will listen to me talk. So thank you all on the line for listening to me talk. But really making sure, especially the affected parties, right? Those folks that have high value reservoirs or water bodies, that they understand the impacts of an invasion and what they can do to prevent an invasion. Next, after education, is once you take it a step further, you can have requirements for the boaters to do this for themselves. And that was something that kind of came, you know, we almost just assume, right? We kind of preach the messages of clean, drain, dry, and you know, stop aquatic hitchhikers and all of these things, even don't move firewood and by where you burn it and other sorts of things. Well, this is taking it that next step further. It's saying, okay, we've already made you aware, but now we're going to require you to do something. So now we're moving into the enforcement space and requirements. So in 2017, the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies passed a resolution to require boaters to pull water drain plugs upon leaving water bodies and to remove vegetation from conveyances. Now, not everybody did adopt that, but the vast majority did, including us in Colorado. So you can't drive over land with your drain plugs in place or with weeds hanging off your trailer. So again, trying to get the public to take that action and making sure that you're very clear about what species that you are working to prevent. But when it comes to aquatic plants, we just said no vegetation. Like, we have our prohibited list, but we don't expect a boater to know that. So we just need the boats clean, drain, and dry, and the trailers, that means no vegetation. And so you can require boaters to do this. If you want to take it another level, then you can require it and provide resources for it, okay? So you can have your boaters do a pledge. I know there are some states, when they register their boats, they do an A.N.S. pledge. They pledge to clean, drain, dry. They take that personal commitment to clean, drain, dry. That's important. There are self-certification programs out there. There are self-inspection programs out there. There are self-decontamination programs out there. And there are a lot of self-cleaning systems now out there. And so, you know, providing tools like CD3 and others for people that are out there to take care of this for themselves. So you educate them, and then if you require it, then you can provide them tools to help them comply. Take it one step further, now you put a human body out there to make sure they're doing it. And if you don't have a budget, then that body can be a volunteer. And so this is where you have volunteers out there. The services are provided, they're not required. So it's not mandatory, but you've got somebody talking to boats on the way in, they're certified and all of that good stuff. And so they may be paid, they may not be volunteer, but the boater is volunteering. The boater is not required, but they're volunteering to submit to the inspection, okay? And then the inspector may be a paid staff, or they may be voluntary staff. But regardless, they should be trained and certified and following procedures and communicating and all of that good stuff. And so this is where you really start to get into kind of the Western model now, because now we've got boots on ramps, talking to boaters, checking boaters on the way in and on the way out. And then you get into the next level, which is what we do in Colorado, mandatory stations. So it is required. A person shall not launch a watercraft without first getting an inspection and decontamination if necessary. Why do we require, why do they go together? I get this question a lot. Why not just inspection? Well, a lot of the inspectors are not law enforcement, okay? We have 750 to 800 of them out there, and they're not law enforcement personnel. They're hired and trained and certified, but they're not a law enforcement. So if they find a problem, like an invasive species on a boat, we want them to give a solution. We want to be able to decon that boat. We want to provide good customer service, and we want to provide an outstanding recreational opportunity. So the more we can empower that inspector to also solve the problem through decontamination, the better things run. When we used to have a lot of inspectors out there without decontamination, what happens is they have to turn them away. They have to call law enforcement. It just gets a lot more difficult. So the more that we can provide them with solutions and tools, the better it goes for the boater, the inspector alike, and generally the faster the boater gets on the water. So there's a lot of different models out there. Again, in Colorado, we are at our lakes and reservoirs, as is New Mexico. So we're the blue on the map. We do not have authority to be on the roadsides in Colorado. So we're generally at lakes and reservoirs or businesses and offices. On the map, the yellow are roadside stations. So Alberta and Oregon have roadside stations exclusively. Pink, Arizona, kind of purpley mauve, they do it by appointment. So the boater needs to know the rules and they need to call and make an appointment for inspection and decontamination. The orange, kind of on the North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, those are roving patrols. So they don't have permanent stations, but they have a crew that go from lake to lake to lake and do education and inspection, and some do decon, some don't. And then the vast majority, which is imaged in green on the map, they do a combination. We call them hybrids. So they do some lakes, some roadsides, some by appointment, some roving. So they're employing all the different models. They're slicing the apple every way they can to try to cover their risk and try to reduce the risk of invasion by watercraft in their space. Okay, so we've already talked about what A.N.S we're concerned about. I wanted just one slide here on early detection. I think monitoring and mapping is so incredibly important. If you don't know what species you're concerned about and you don't know where they are, then it's very hard to prevent or contain anything. And so often monitoring is on the chopping block, and I really think it's foundational that we have a good understanding of the natural resources out there so that we actually can respond rapidly, or as rapid as possible, right? So we're doing plankton tows, looking for the initial veliger, zooplankton life stage, free floating in the water column. And then we're also looking for the settled juveniles and the adults, and then crayfish trapping plant inventories, etc. Colorado's a square. It's easy to stick on a map and a slide. We have 3 crews. They monitor almost 200 public waters a year, over 600 since we started. We do have a laboratory here on site. Not every state A.N.S program has a laboratory. There are other places that you can do these services, but we're really focused here on plants, mollusks, crustaceans, zooplankton, not as much phytoplankton. And then we use private labs for genetic confirmation. We do have, I believe, a lot of just natural history inventory. And so we've tried to do some of that with macrophytes and crustaceans in partnership with the Natural History Museum and the Denver Botanic Gardens Herbarium. We do have a requirement on the books for reporting, and so we often do get reports and we go out and verify those. Okay, so it's mandatory here in Colorado to do inspections. That means that if any boat is launched in the water outside of Colorado, it must be inspected before it goes into our state waters. And then we have a whole lot of reservoirs that require it upon entry. Those are our prevention waters. And so, if the owner or the manager requires it, then the boater must submit to it. Now, keep in mind here in the West, we have reservoirs. They are created. We do have some beautiful natural lakes, don't get me wrong. We have some amazing, amazing natural lakes. But the vast majority of our recreational waters are dams. They're reservoirs. They're created for flood control, for irrigation, for agriculture, for hydropower, for drinking water, for storage. And so recreation is a privilege. We are so fortunate that we get to boat and fish and play on these reservoirs, and we need to protect that recreation so that we can sustain amazing outdoor recreation in places like Colorado And so that recreation can unfortunately and has been taken away due to the threat of mussels and other A.N.S. And this boat inspection program keeps these waters open. And so a lot of our reservoirs are negative, and the inspections are happening to prevent an invasion. And so why all this effort? Why all this money? We are managing the single largest vector of introduction and spread. We know that these critters are moving overland on recreational boats. We know other A.N.S. are moving. We know that because we intercept them and we catch them. But the truth is, mussels are the most costly invasive species, and they are a huge ecological and financial threat to the Western world, to the Western U.S. And so we are preventing these introductions. We do have a risk-based implementation. So if you don't have millions of data points and you want to kind of try to get going, you can. The first risk assessment we did was basically a survey with our aquatic biologists, our wildlife managers, our park managers, and our partners. And we looked at lakes and reservoirs that were open to public boating. So there's your first criteria, it's open to the public. Second criteria was high out-of-state use. Do they have marinas? Do they have complex craft? Those sorts of things. So the people that use these waters, that manage them, that know them, they know a lot of this information. And the original risk assessment is not very far off from the one we have today that's filled with millions of data points. But I want to just kind of talk you through that for a minute. So we have a 3-phase risk assessment here in Colorado, and this is how we prioritize our limited funding. The first question is, what is the likelihood that mussels will be introduced via watercraft? Again, remember, we don't have them upstream. They're not coming downstream at us. We're a headwater state. So what's the likelihood that someone's going to bring them in? The next is, what's the likelihood that if introduced, they can survive, they can build shells, they can grow to maturity? And then if they do that, what's the likelihood that they can grow, reproduce, and establish an invasive population? So the watercraft piece, we looked at a number of factors, and all of this data came right out of our data sharing system. And then the risk of establishment, we've been doing water quality work in conjunction with our Department of Public Health and the Environment for a while. And so thankfully, we have a lot of water quality information to do this 2-part analysis. And so at the end of the day, all of our waters in Colorado that we looked at range for zebra and quagga mussel habitat. 70% fell in the very high or high risk, and but everything was at risk, although some were lower risk than others. We also looked at temperature analysis, comparing to some of the work that Bob McMahon did in Texas a while back, and found that none of our waters were too hot or too cold to support zebra or quagga mussels. And so in terms of building support and justifying the program, this is a really important piece of it. This is an image of a handout we give out to legislators and decision makers saying, hey, you know, where we are choosing to put inspection stations are the places of highest risk, the places with the most potential to have an introduction, because we can't be everywhere, unfortunately, all the time. And that's why teaching boaters to do this for themselves is so important. We do have stations across the state. They're operated by a large variety of organizations: state government, municipal government, federal governments, concessionaires, clubs, you name it. We will work with anybody that wants to protect their waters. And we do intercept mussel boats. And for those of you that play in Colorado, this is just a crazy boat to get here, because we are not the Great Lakes. And but this came into one of our reservoirs and was infested with zebra mussels. So we do get some interesting things out here. The last couple of years, our number of infested boats has skyrocketed, mostly due to the population explosion at Powell, but we do get boats from all over the country. This is just kind of a map of our inspection stations. If the bubble is bigger, that means they've intercepted more infested craft. And this is where the infested craft are coming from. So Utah, Arizona are kind of the highest colors, the highest number of boats, and that's mainly Lake Powell and Lake Mead and Lake Havasu and Lake Pleasant. and then the Great Lakes and Mississippi River Basin. So I mean, we get boats from everywhere, and we've intercepted boats from a lot of places that have mussels. So boats are moving all over the place, and we pull a lot of critters off of. This is the nationwide map, and it has kind of the western key on it, so that building consensus language, infested, positive, suspect, etc. So we have 8 waters that we have delisted in Colorado, meaning we found a veliger or eDNA at some point in time, but not an invasive population. And 1 suspect water we hope to delist next year. So we know these things are moving on crafts, and the goal is to stop that inoculation. We also have rules for our people. Like, we have to set the example. We have to be better than anybody else. So we have to be clean, drain, and dry all the time. We have HACCPs in place for our biologists and our hatcheries. Everybody on staff is certified to do inspections and decons. So start with your own agency and educate if they're not, and get these kind of things in place. Obviously, our hatcheries, we have hazardous analysis and critical control point plans for all of them, annual inspections. Thankfully, we have no A.N.S in our hatcheries, but that's something that we're concerned about, that we're working on. And then again, I always wrap it back to education, because education is the most important thing. We can't be on every water body all the time. We need our boaters and our anglers to take action, and professionals to clean their boots and gear in between uses. That it really works to stop the spread, and it's not that hard. So consistency is key in messaging. Super excited to see the new MOU, and missing a few logos on the slide, but excited about that. The truth of the matter is that each inspection is a face-to-face educational contact. We're taking education to the extreme, and when the education doesn't work, we have the laws and the regulations and the enforcement in place to protect our waters. But it starts and ends with education, and the best way to affect behavior change is face-to-face education. So a lot of resources are available to you. Please check out the westernais.org website. Almost everything I talked about today is up there. westernregionalpanel.org has a new website we just launched. I'm so excited about it. Please take a look. My next slide is on training. Contact me if you want information on our data sharing system, and check out our inspection and decon videos on YouTube. Okay, my last slide. I started this journey back in 2006 at a WIT training class with Wen Baldwin. Quagga D. Davis, who's pictured on the far right there, she's the trainer now. She's phenomenal. She's teaching a class today at Lake Mead. I stole this off her Facebook page. Follow Lake Mead Quagga updates on Facebook. You'll have a lot of good info. But we have 3 levels of standardized classes out there. She's teaching today at Lake Mead. The next 2 are listed there. If you want more information, if you want to get started, this class is really a great place to go. You know, give us a call and chat about it. But again, all the information is on westernais.org. Okay, and with that, thank you. I really appreciate your time. I hope this was valuable to you, and I look forward to any questions or feedback that you have.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was an incredible, comprehensive presentation. We have time for maybe a couple of questions. I'm sorry, I think we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions that were asked. So if I don't get to yours, there's Elizabeth's email and phone number. Elizabeth, I'm sure you don't mind if people reach out directly to you.
Yes, absolutely. And what I can do as well is, if there's a question that we don't get to today, I can go through the log and get back to those individuals. And so I can work with Belle to get back to anybody that we might not have time to answer right now. So yeah. I won't leave anybody hanging out there.
Okay, great. All right, so a couple questions. Here's one from Tony Pede. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. He asks, there is some consideration being given to cleaning systems that use high pressure air for decontamination. In your experience, is a system like this effective?
I think it depends on your goals and your risk tolerance. Air can be certainly very effective. We are very concerned in the West about veligers and ballast tanks, engines, and places that can't be drained. And we're also concerned with watercraft safety. And so we use hot water, 140 degrees for the exterior, 120 degrees for the interior when we're doing a professional decontamination. We don't let the public, we don't give the public our power washers or our on-demand water systems to use. So in terms of like self-cleaning stations, I think they're a great alternative to water from a safety perspective, and they can be very effective. Yes. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, here's a question from Amanda Smith, who asks, what is the enforcement success rate of mandatory inspections? Does law enforcement actually write tickets, and do they hold up in the courts?
Wow, that is a great question. And I would love to do some regional analysis and get you a really good answer on that. I know that I had a group of about 65 people last week, all of our inspection station supervisors, and 70% of them were law enforcement. And at least here in Colorado, and I know state of Utah at Lake Powell, we couldn't survive without our law enforcement because of the number of mussel boats that are moving kind of from Powell to Colorado. When we first started, it was really educational based. And so we didn't write tickets for a very long time. I mean, 10 years, we didn't write tickets. But with the increase in invasion happening all around us, law enforcement is getting a lot more engaged, and they are writing tickets. And in some cases, we are quarantining boats, we are impounding boats, we are seizing boats. And that's very rare. We do in Colorado 500,000 inspections per year. I don't know the number of decons we did last year, but it's less than 20,000. And then we intercepted less than 100 mussel boats. And out of those, I don't know how many needed law enforcement action, but yes, in some places law enforcement is engaged. They are writing tickets. I don't know how well they're holding up in the courts. I just haven't gotten that feedback, and I don't know anybody that's done that analysis. I know in other places we wish we had a lot more law enforcement. So I think it kind of depends on the site.
Mm-hmm. A follow-up to that, Elizabeth, do you think the Sea Grant Law Center might be a place to go to ask that question?
Possibly, yeah, they're great.
Okay. I think with that, we're going to have to wrap up because we're just about at the hour. I want to thank Elizabeth again for her time and experience and sharing that with us today. I'm going to wrap up with a couple of slides, and first note that if you would like to see this presentation again, you can do that as a NASMA member. This presentation is recorded and will be shared in the member portal on NASMA's website. So if you aren't a member, please join. Here's our main website, and I'm going to hop over here and just real quickly say there's a variety of membership options. All membership options get you access to our previous webinar recordings. Partnerships are for organizations. You get a little more benefit, and the Play Clean Go outreach campaign resources come with that. And finally, a plug for our conference later this October, where we will have multiple sessions on aquatic invasive species issues. I think we might want to follow up on this webinar today and kind of follow up on some of these boat decontamination successes and challenges. So with that, thank you again, Elizabeth, and thank you all for joining us today. And stay tuned for future webinars as part of our series on NASMA.org. And have a great rest of the week.